Play-in tournament action around the association starts tomorrow with both of the games in the Western Conference. More play-in tournament action on Wednesday, and then we'll have those final play-in tournament games on Friday. The actual playoffs start on Saturday. 2 Western Conference series, of course, have already been ironed out. The 4 and the 5, the 3 versus the 6. In both of the lower-seeded teams are actually the favorites outright, despite not having home court advantage. It's the Mavericks and the Clippers, once again, for the third time in the last 5 NBA seasons. The Mavericks, one of the hottest teams down the home stretch of this NBA season, a slight favorite at -120. Despite the Clippers having home floor advantage in Los Angeles, same story for the Suns. -120 for Phoenix against a Timberwolves team that was in consideration for the number 1 seed really a good majority of this NBA regular season, but now they finish as the 3 seed. When you look at the outright odds first and foremost, how do you expect these series to play out?
Awesome, because you take a look at the numbers, -120, -102 splits in both of these series, which basically shows you we're roughly around to pick them. Now, if you're saying which one is mildly surprised, I'm not surprised by the Dallas Mavericks. Full gas on that team. The way Luka Doncic is playing, every bit can be an MVP. I think he can bolster the Mavericks, where I do think they have a legitimate chance to get past the Los Angeles Clippers, even though, Ben, they don't have home court advantage. Now, the questions are always going to come up, and I'm going to take those questions right now. That's the Timberwolves and the Suns. The Suns are a -120 favorite. I don't think that should be the case, to be honest. Karl-Anthony Towns is back. The Timberwolves are going to have home court advantage, and the trustability that we talk about with the Suns, for me, still isn't there yet. So if we're looking at both of those, again, roughly close to a pick'em, nobody's a heavy favorite. Disagree slightly that we have the Phoenix Suns as a favorite, but I mildly like the Dallas Mavericks as a slight favorite as well.
When you look at the Mavericks, 6 games above 500 after a loss to Indiana on March 5th. From that point, they ended the regular season at 50-32. They won 16 of their final 20, and they won 11 of their final 14. That included 2 back-to-back losses to end out the regular season when maybe there wasn't a ton of care against the Pistons, and of course on the road yesterday playing nobody, losing by nearly 50 against the Oklahoma City Thunder. But in that span, when they were winning games, they were also covering a ton as well. We just shared 16 of their last 20 they won. They also covered in 16 of their final 20 to end out the regular season. There might be hotter teams necessarily, like Philadelphia, winners of 8 straight. There might be better teams overall entering the postseason as the Celtics. But in the final month and a half of this NBA regular season, nobody has put together a better record than the Dallas Mavericks. Again, 3rd playoff matchup between the Mavs and the Clippers in the last 5 years. Both opening round series prior in 2020 and in 2021. The Clippers won both in 6 games in 2020, in 7 games in 2021. That's interesting to me, though, DRS. Doesn't that say to you there should be some health concerns for LA, that maybe the Clippers are not going to be at full strength to have home floor advantage? If you had home court advantage and you have Kawhi Leonard, and you have Paul George, and you have James Harden, and you have Russell Westbrook, wouldn't that team at least be a slight outright favorite? Maybe it's just an odds flip. -120 for the Clippers, -102 for the Mavs. I am really surprised to see Dallas as the favorite in this series.
Yeah, and again, heading down the stretch, right? And you're right about that, because what was always the thought process behind the Clippers? No matter what we say, by the time they get to game number 1, they're not going to be healthy in the playoffs, because why they never are. So maybe there's a chance where they're not healthy, but we'll find out certainly who's going to be in that starting lineup. And still, we're not talking about this saying, hey, Ben, this game is tonight. Let's see what happens on the court. Look at where it says this first game, 5:00 p.m. Actually, I don't think that's the right. They don't have a time yet, but I believe it's due for Sunday coming up this weekend. But that's a whole week-long process where you should be healthy, and we're not calling on any things. But again, the Kawhi Leonard camp, The guy had a torn ACL, and we were listing him on a night-to-night basis as questionable, even though he wasn't even the same city that his team was playing in. So we know NBA teams can be real coy about who's in and who's out, but I think it just comes down to how well the Dallas Mavericks, I'm talking about Kyrie Irving and Luka Doncic, have been playing down the stretch. I think that's buoying a lot of those bets coming in here to the FanDuel Sportsbook, where we're not trusting the Clippers, but we love what we see out of the Mavericks right now, Ben.
And how much stock are you putting into regular season success and the sample size all year long? The Minnesota Timberwolves, 30 games above 500, or the idea that the postseason is its own beast in its entirety? And who would you rather have than Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, and Bradley Beal all on one side? Well, the odds makers, of course, have Phoenix as that slight series favorite at minus 120. I do want to make this point to the Western Conference odds, where you look at things right now. Phoenix and Minnesota have the same exact number to win the Western Conference at plus 850, tied for the fifth best number. Again, Phoenix minus 120, Minnesota minus 102, pretty much up in the air from the odds perspective for a best-of-7 series outright number. When you look at LA and Dallas, the Mavericks at 8-1, the Clippers at 6-1, a $2 gap, despite the fact that Dallas is favored to win the series. That's interesting to me as well.
It is interesting because, look, a lot of times we have to remind ourselves here, like the sports book is going to put out numbers here. And also the betting public, whether it be sharp or public, is going to push those numbers around. So you know what's going to be a surprise, Ben? What's a better question also? Clippers, Mavericks, Timberwolves, Suns, minus 120, minus 102. Which series for us is more likely to have that number move? Meaning like a minus 125? Or how about the Clippers turning into a favorite over the Dallas Mavericks? Are we waiting for injury information later the week? Or maybe how this shapes up? But those numbers will change here throughout the week. And from my money here, it's probably more likely, you know what's funny about that? Like, because I know we love the Suns because of how fun that big three is. But I got to tell you, like, I just think the Timberwolves, a game or two goes their different directions. They're the number one overall seed. So from a respect level, I don't look at it as disrespect that the Clippers are actually a slight underdog. But I do look for it as disrespect that the Timberwolves, completely healthy now in the playoffs in round number one with home court advantage, Ben, are an underdog here. So for my money, I would think that the Timberwolves eventually would pass the Suns before game number one as the favorite in that series.
And we got that update early last week that Karl Anthony Towns would play at some point in the regular season finale 3 group of games, right? He didn't play on the road in Denver. The Nuggets won, but he did play in the final 2 at home against Atlanta and Phoenix. 28 and 29 minutes. Nothing statistically to write home about, but good to get his legs under him now for this playoff run. I have a Suns ticket to win the NBA championship. I hate this opening round matchup, and they're on the harder portion of the Western Conference playoff bracket. Something to keep in mind as well, because the winner of that series will take on the winner of the series between the Nuggets and the 7 seed, whoever wins the play-in tournament game tomorrow night in New Orleans between the Pelicans and the Lakers. You could make an argument that you want to lose tomorrow night and then knock off Golden State and Sacramento to be the 8 seed to take on Oklahoma City, then be the 7 seed to take on Denver. Not how it's going to play out, but again, just at least from the matchup perspective moving forward. Now to the Eastern Conference, where, of course, the 3 versus 6 and the 4 versus 5 is set as well. But the team that has home floor advantage is a much heftier favorite than what we are seeing in the Western Conference. Milwaukee falls to the 3 seed because the New York Knicks went full out to get the 2 seed, and it might be a more favorable matchup for Milwaukee, not having to take on the winner of Philadelphia and Miami. The Bucks a minus 225 favorite against Indiana. I say more favorable on paper, but is it? We'll talk about that series history throughout this season between Milwaukee and Indiana in just a moment. The Cavs nearly a $2 favorite DRS against the Indiana Pacers, against the Orlando Magic, but the Cleveland Cavaliers did not play well down the stretch. Neither did Milwaukee.
No, and this also, the matchup here, there's two things we're going to be predicated on, right? We look at the Orlando Magic in a similar way that we look to OKC. Now, granted, OKC for me is way better than Orlando, but maybe a year ahead of their time, where the Orlando Magic was supposed to fight for a playoff spot this year, but instead they're solidified in a top 6 seed. The same way we look at OKC, like, okay, let's see what we have this year. Chet Holmgren's going to be inserted in the lineup with SGA. Let's firmly get into the playoffs. We never thought they would be the number 1 overall seed. So it's no disrespect to the Orlando Magic, but talent for talent, if both teams are healthy and come to play, the Cleveland Cavaliers should be able to put away the Orlando Magic. The Magic didn't play very well down the stretch, if not for a Bucks team that I don't know if they wanted to show up yesterday, not show up, play or not play. They just haven't been a very good franchise over the past 3 to 4 weeks here, fumbling down the stretch. Now, let's get to that Milwaukee Bucks Pacers series. Minus 225. Yeah. Again, the sports books are going to put out a number based on the information they have. They're going to look at their numbers throughout the regular season and also the rosters moving forward. They're anticipating that we're getting MVP level back Giannis Antetokounmpo into their lineup that minus 225 price, right? That's really what it feels like, because that Pacers plus 180 number, based on the fact that, like, Milwaukee is not just saying, okay, we played unbelievable basketball down the stretch, now let's get Giannis back into the equation. They played terrible basketball down the stretch and question marks on their best player on their team coming back. I'm actually surprised the Bucks are a minus 225 price, but how do I quantify it? It means that playoff basketball is much different than the regular season, which I understand. And we're supposed to get Giannis back playing 37 minutes, 35 points, 21 rebounds, 6 assists, and 4 blocks. That's the Giannis we're getting back based upon that price point here, Ben.
Yeah, absolutely so. I think it makes a lot of sense to take the Pacers and the series spread plus a game and a half. It's minus 128 if you want to do that for Indiana. And we have said this. These two teams have played each other outside of their 4 regular season games in the in-season tournament semifinal back in early December out in Las Vegas. And it has not been Milwaukee dominating Indiana. It's been the reverse. The Pacers have had the Bucks number. Indiana's won 4 of the 5 against Milwaukee this year. 3 of those 5 games over. Opening game of this series on Sunday inside the Pfizer Forum. The total is listed at 237.5. That would be the second lowest in the 6 games. 3 of the 5 over DRS, but 4 of the 5 totals in the regular season or the IST at 257 or higher. We are expecting to see some offense, but are we now in the playoffs? That's the story. 237.5 is only going to be there in this opening round. We are not going to see those totals moving forward in the rounds and beyond. So do we see it early in the playoffs? Indiana over in 5 straight, 6 of its last 7 to close out the regular season. Or is that number baking in what we saw during the regular season and we go way under to start playoff basketball?
And it's also 2 different philosophies, Ben, because usually when you say, hey, man, these teams are going to get a full week's rest here after a long season grind, those legs should be in shape and going up and down the court. But also we know professional athletes are creatures of habit. What do you mean I'm not going to play a game for a full week? We can only do so much in a scrimmage on a Tuesday, Wednesday, and or a Thursday. But I'm led to believe, like, forget the 237.5, legitimate chance it does go over because that's the way the Pacers want to take this pace here. But the Pacers only getting 3.5 points in game number 1 right now. I love the Pacers in that game because if you want to win the series, you want to sting that team in game number 1 and take home court advantage away. Let's see how that one plays out. But 237.5, that means, you know what? We might have a really fun series to bet here prop-wise.
We also need to go back to the Eastern Conference odds, and we'll do so to start hour 3 because there is a lot of value on the other side of the bracket away from Boston. MVP conversation next.